So Ted Cruz moment is, well, I'm going to play the clip and we'll talk about it.
And that leads to the third proposition that is indisputable. IVF is fully protected in law. It should be fully protected in law, and it will remain 100% fully protected in law. Every Democrat knows that. Out of 100 senators in this body support IVF treatments. I strongly support IVF treatments. In fact, in the state of Texas, IVF treatments are protected in law, and in fact, since 1987, Texas has mandated IVF coverage for many group health insurance plans. The Democrats know this. There's a lot of focus on the Alabama Supreme Court decision. The Alabama Supreme Court decision was not a decision striking down IVF. In fact, it was a case brought by parents seeking IVF against a clinic that had negligently cared for the embryos. It was a decision in defense of preserving IVF. But a whole lot of partisan elected officials and a whole lot of partisans in the media immediately seized on that decision to say, aha, IVF will be struck down. Well, I will say the state of Alabama acted promptly. Bright red, ruby red Alabama acted promptly to say, no, IVF is protected. Right now, today, roughly 2% of live births are brought into the world through IVF. IVF is...
Okay, remember that number. Only 2%, okay? Just remember that.
A wonderful gift that lets parents who want to welcome a son or daughter, a child to love, lets them welcome that child into the world. But understand why we're having a hearing on IVF. Not because there is any threat to IVF, but because the Democrats cannot defend their position on abortion. They have not convened a hearing on whether the country should adopt the Democrat position and allow partial birth abortion in all 50 states. That is their position, but it's wildly unpopular. So for any mom or dad at home looking to have a child through IVF, understand IVF is 100% protected in law. It should be. It will be. I strongly support it, and so does every other member of this body.
Senator. All right, so there's a lot going on in there, but there's a couple things to point out. Number one, Ted Cruz is a good politician, so, you know, whether or not he agrees with this morally, I don't know, but it certainly seems like if it would be a conflict of conscience for him if he wasn't in agreement with it. But also that he's part of the SBC, and so the positions on what you can do there are pretty much up to your local body as far as what's ethically permitted and what's not, as long as it's not blatantly a direct contradiction in Scripture. And this is how a lot of Christians get around the idea of IVF, is they say, well, you know, it's for a good, you know, it's technically a necessary, you know, it's a challenging time. There's even, you know, when I was in seminary, I can remember learning about IVF in my ethics classes and learning about the theological conflict there. And people just, the arguments are hard for your average Christian to understand why it's wrong, because number one, most of them don't understand what the process actually involves. So the family who's going through with it does, the husband and wife, when they decide to go through with it, they do understand what is involved. And then it's almost always a conflict of interest, because they're going to have to decide what they're going to do with these kids, you know, because they're going to fertilize multiples, and then they got to decide what to do. If the first two take, then they have to decide if they do two or one or whatever's left over, the embryos, they have to decide what they're going to do with those. They're either going to donate them to science, which is abortion or human experimentation, or they're going to abort them, or they're going to keep them on ice until whenever, which, based on what I've heard and some of the research or some of the posts that people have had on Twitter, you know, the thawing process doesn't exactly lead to a healthy outcome for the kid. So this is a definite conflict of interest theologically. It's also an indication, very similar to when the pill came out, very similar to when back in the 1930s or whatever, I think is when the Anglican Church kind of started moving towards contraception. Well, technically the Episcopal Church. But when Protestants are moving in the direction on contraception or procreative technologies, they definitely seem to think, let's ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And this is what I think is important, is that this means that the definition of Christianity is changing. Morally speaking, if you've got one group over here that says, well, we can kill kids to have kids, and the other group over here says, well, no, it's not even just that, but this is just an entirely immoral process of having a family. Well, those are two different groups. Those are two different types of Christians. In the same way that we might say, well, yeah, in name, California and the Democrats are definitely American, but at the end of the day, they're also saying that illegal immigrants can vote. And so those are essentially two different Americas. And all the polling data shows this, that there's more of a divide on what it means to be American in this country now, as far as like Democrats versus Republicans. Probably, everybody points out that it's never been this way since the Civil War, and they use that to kind of fearmonger and stuff. But my point is that if we look at the rest of how the conservative movement has changed, this is very similar to the gay marriage debate, where it was like a very small amount of people who were coming in and saying, hey, we want this right. We feel like we deserve to have marriage. And it was, the stats were, well, it's like 1 or 2% of people are gay, that's that. And if we look at how many want to get married, it's even smaller. So who cares? And so this is essentially kind of the same argument. It's just weird to hear it from Ted Cruz because, we kind of see him as somebody who's having similar values as Christians, regardless of whether you're Catholic or Protestant. But I want to point out that this isn't just Ted Cruz. This is also, we've also, as the GOP, welcomed in conservatives that were or Democrats that are now conservative, who have totally different lifestyles, totally different views. And I'm not saying that the GOP has to be Christian. It's just that there's a conflict here on a moral level that is very difficult to reconcile politically. And so let's take a look at Dave Rubin here.
Let me just say something else on this, which is that everyone's running around, DeSantis hates gays, blah, blah. I happen to be gay. I am married to a dude, okay? We're having kids. You know what showed up at my door 2 days ago? A package with we're having two babies, with two baby onesies from Ron DeSantis and his wife, okay? He does not hate gay people. At this PragerU event that I mentioned before, I said, Governor, this is my husband, David. Big hug, smile, took a picture, congratulations on the kid. This has nothing to do with an assault on gay rights. If DeSantis was saying gay people can't get married, gay people can't work, whatever the litany of stupidity that these people think, of course I would be against it. There's nothing I stand for more than equal rights for everybody. Let me just say something else on this.
So, again, like he's just talking about DeSantis. These are clips, Cruz is from last week. This is a clip from back when probably a couple months ago when DeSantis was running for president. But again, it begs the question, okay, well, whose rights is the GOP going to defend? Because when you look at the stats, they're going to have to say no to some people. That's just the facts. They're going to have to say, we're going to prioritize this group of constituents over this group of constituents. And it's going to be based on who they think is going to be more likely to vote for them. And the thing that's important here is that people are changing, that they're using the same terms, but they're redefining them in the same way that we redefined marriage. Marriage was just between a man and a woman, and then it encompassed a whole host of different definitions now culturally and politically between a man and a woman and a woman. And if these things continue, then we're going to find ourselves seeing, more and more broad definitions. And the same thing, I would argue, is happening with family. So DeSantis was on the campaign trail when he was running for president. And this all came from an article I wrote. If you want more details on this kind of issue, it's on my Substack. It's Will the GOP Continue to Fight for Religious Liberty? And this was one of the clips I placed in there because I think it highlights the question, okay, what do you mean by religious freedom? What kind of things are you going to defend? So let's watch this clip.
That we're not strong on religious liberty because the founders would have laughed that would have ever been a case, that you're going and doing that. But I think it's the same mindset that your right to practice your faith, and not just with Christians, Orthodox Jews and others, they think that it stops the minute that it impinges on their agenda. That's why you can have a case like a 303 creative at the U.S. Supreme Court, where the 3 liberal justices dissent, and they would have supported the compelled speech. Do you think for a minute, if there was conservative compelled speech, that those 3 justices, liberals, would have dissented? No way. They would have been on the other side of that. And so they're basically saying that religious freedom is less as a matter of God-given right, and it's more something that the elites are allowing you to do and are tolerating you doing it, but only up until the point that it conflicts with their agenda. And that's very dangerous for society. And if you think about it, the family and faith are the building blocks of society, and those are the 2 areas that they're really waging an assault against right now.
So at the end there, he brings it up. Religion and family are the 2 things that society is based on. Well, the problem is we've already redefined marriage, and now things like IVF are going to redefine family. And the reason why I think this is going to happen is because the reality is that family and religion go hand in hand. The state doesn't get to tell you what is the marriage is a God-given institution first and foremost that has political benefits, because the same thing that makes a church flourish or any assembly is the same thing that makes a society flourish. If the thing that you want to grow needs people, then the building block for that is family, whether that's a soccer club or whether that's a church or whether that's a nation. If you're not having kids, then you're going to be in trouble. And so people will say, well, you know, the IVF is helping people do that. Yeah, but only 2%. So the question is, if only 2% of people are doing this, then why is it such a political sticking point? And I think part of it is that the Democrats are making it one. This is political warfare. You know, they're trying to, well, not warfare, but, you know, they're trying to put Republicans in a difficult spot because they know that IVF is a contentious issue within the party. But the bigger issue is that if Christians continue to be divided over some of their most basic moral convictions, like, for example, hey, you can't go through a medical procedure if it involves the killing of a child. If life really begins at conception, you know, that procedure over there is kind of off limits for us. You know, you got Jehovah's Witnesses out there that won't even like get a shot. Like, I know a friend of mine who literally told me, he's like, yeah, I've never gotten one because, you know, we grew up this way and, you know, whatever. So if people out there are willing to take stands like that, you know, what does it say about, you know, us Christians, Catholics or Protestant or whatever, who say, yeah, you know, I just really wanted this kid. And so I said I was going to go through this procedure, even though it violates one of God's commandments and it's not the way God intended it. And I think that this is causing Christians to end up in a difficult spot, because if you're willing to just take whatever incentives society gives you, well, then your politicians are going to do the same thing. And they're technically representing you as a result. And I think that's part of the reason why Ted Cruz is doing what he's doing. His job is to be a politician. And as long as this happens, then Orthodox Christians are going to begin to lose their political representation, their political value, because the positions we take are not going to be advantageous for politicians to take a stand on. So this is highlighted even further by the fact that Andrew Klavan, who, you know, has been talked about recently because of the Canada stuff. I don't want to talk about that stuff. I want to talk about the fact that even amongst some of our most beloved conservatives, and I like Andrew Klavan a lot. I don't know him personally, but I love his show. I watch it all the time when I can. With all the hosts that they have, it's hard to keep up. And now that I'm doing my own podcast, it's even harder. But, you know, all of us, I don't, you know, I'm on Twitter all the time, and I think most of his followers feel this way, that he's inconsistent about, you know, the LGBT issue. But there's a clip from a while back, you know, it's about 5 years old, but I presume that he still holds this position. But it only highlights the fact that all of these clips that I've just showed you are from prominent conservative politicians or influencers. And the definitions that conservatives have for them, as we will find out in the next slide, do not align at all, but Democrats do.
Purpose. I've been in the arts all my life. I know a lot of gay people, you know, a lot of gay people in my life, many of whom I love, many of whom have been my friends. It seems to me that even though the center of human life is a man and a woman coming together to create children, that is at the very center of human life, There is room for life to exist outside of the center. And it seems that if you get rid of all the other sins that destroy people, the promiscuity, the infidelity, the hurtfulness, and use of force and betrayal, if you get rid of all of that, and you're just left with two people of the same sex who love each other for life, it seems to me that their sexual urge could be subsumed into the greater good, even though you're not using it for procreation. It can be subsumed into the greater good of your affection for one another, and I believe that this is an attitude that the church needs to change, and probably will change over time. It doesn't have to make homosexuality, homosexual relationships, a sacrament as marriage is, because we understand that marriage is at the center of human life and is sacred in that way. Mm-hmm. But it should start letting people have the consolation of sexual companionship if they can't have it with the opposite sex, if their natural bent is to have it with their own sex. So I disagree with him. I thought he was an eloquent and intelligent spokesman for his point of view.
So, I don't want to dive too much into the Aristotelian discussion on that, but it only highlights the fact that bottom line is that Klavan's position is explicitly against what the church teaches. It's explicitly against what the Bible teaches. And we have this kind of, I'm going to pick and choose what I want out of my Christian faith. And I think to a certain extent, that's just natural. Like, your spiritual growth has to happen. Like, even I'm learning stuff that obviously, for anyone who knows any recent events in my past, but the nature of this whole situation is that Christians are not agreeing on what are moral issues, and that's primarily the political sphere, but Democrats are. And so when we look at these stats here, their position is 8% say it's very bad, 11% say somewhat bad, and 23% say somewhat good. And so and then 57% say very good. And so if we look at the bottom here, you can see this is kind of the section that I care about. If you look at Protestant and Catholic, it's kind of funny because Catholics are way over here, and this is probably why Michael Knowles says he doesn't believe in statistics, because that definitely makes you wonder, especially after the Fiducia Supplicans, where they got their statistics. But either way, this is problematic, and so I'm going to highlight some things here. So you have Republicans that say 38% say it's somewhat good, and 15% of Republicans say very good. And then you have 23% of Democrats say it's somewhat good, and 57% say it's very good. So the thing is that this overlap here, and you're starting to see, I'd be curious to see this also on abortion, because I think some of that is happening as well, is that you're seeing this breakdown in the Republican Party where it's basically split down the middle, where it's essentially a 50-50, and the Democrats are taking a significant portion of those votes, especially in local elections, which is what we saw in issue 1 in Ohio, that like this pro-life issue comes down, and a lot of conservatives voted yes on issue 1. And so, it's just a fact that if we can't even get our party in line on abortion, then and we can't even get our party in line on marriage, then IVF is just another nail in the coffin. And so we're running into this problem where it again is no longer advantageous for us to continue down this road. And I have more stuff on that, but I have a listener question that I have to get to first.